In 2007, Christina Yovich was named one of the most charming women in Switzerland in the Miss Switzerland competition. However, 17 years later, her name made headlines again, but this time for the most tragic reasons. The beginning of this story was marked by a phone call from the kindergarten where Christina's children attended. The woman did not come to pick them up after classes, which greatly worried her parents, who were shocked by their daughter's sudden disappearance. Strangely, Christina's husband, it seemed, was not at all concerned about the situation. Since less than a day had passed since Christina's disappearance, the law enforcement authorities were not in a hurry to intervene. Then Christina's father decided to act on his own and began searching the house. What he found turned out to be truly horrifying. Switzerland is a country located in the heart of Europe, surrounded by mountains, lakes, picturesque villages, and high alpine peaks. Here, it seems, there are more ski resorts and hiking trails than residents. Despite this, about 9 million people call this country their home. The capital of Switzerland is the city of Bern, and the most populous is Zurich. If you drive about an hour north of Bern or an hour west of Zurich, you can find the charming city of Basel, located right on the border with France and Germany. Basel is an amazing place for walks, with Gothic cathedrals, red sandstone buildings, and the Rhine River flowing through the heart of the city. Southwest of Basel is a small commune called Bingen. It was here, in the early hours of February 13, 2024, that a horrific discovery was made, which shook the entire town. It all started the day before, when Christina's grandmother and grandfather received a disturbing call from their granddaughter's kindergarten. Their daughter, Christina, a former model and successful entrepreneur, did not pick up her children after their classes. This seemed very strange, as she adored her little ones and was an extremely responsible mother. The situation became even more suspicious, as the children's father also did not answer the calls. After picking up the grandchildren from the kindergarten, the grandmother and grandfather returned to the family home, where they found Marco, Christina's husband, but the woman herself was not there. The most bizarre thing was that Marco seemed completely calm, as if nothing had happened. He stated that he did not know where his wife was and offered her father a drink. For several hours, the man behaved as if everything was fine, and even seemed rather cheerful. He conversed with Christina's parents as if it were an ordinary day, and then bid farewell to the children, wished them good night, and sent them to bed. However, Christina's father was not going to simply leave everything as it was. He was deeply concerned about the fate of his daughter. Instead of leaving the house and going home, the man decided to carefully inspect the entire premises. The fact is that Christina and Marco lived in a prestigious estate in Bingen. It was a rather large manor with many rooms and nooks, so it took Christina's father some time to survey the entire house and then go out to the yard. Eventually, he descended to the laundry room, located in the basement of the house. This room more resembled an isolated bunker, with thick concrete walls and steel doors that closed it off. When Christina's father finally went inside, he noticed several large garbage bags lying in the corner of the room. From one of them, to his incredible horror, a strand of light hair was protruding. Curiosity took over. Unfortunately, the bag contained the head of his daughter. After opening the package and realizing what had happened, the man ran out of the house, screaming and calling for help. Soon after, the distraught father called the police to report that his daughter had been brutally murdered and dismembered. The authorities arrived at the scene some time later. From the very beginning, it was clear that Christina Yovich was dead, and it also became apparent that her husband, most likely, was guilty of this crime. Christina was an unusual person, clearly different from the average 9-to-5 worker. Her career path was one of the most interesting, and the transition from one success to another was inspiring. Although Christina was born and raised in Bingen and spent most of her life in Bern, she had Serbian roots thanks to her parents. As the woman grew older, in 2003 she won the Miss Northwest Switzerland competition, and in 2007 she became a finalist in the Miss Switzerland competition. In addition, she received other awards in this field. It can be said with confidence that Christina was the embodiment of classic beauty. However, Christina's talents were not limited to just outward beauty. Her potential was even more revealed after the end of her runway career. After completing her modeling path as she matured, Christina started her own business. She trained other women in the art of runway walking for participation in famous fashion shows and runway performances. Moreover, she helped newcomers prepare for beauty pageants and castings. But even this was not enough, as Christina was an incredibly versatile personality. In parallel, she worked as an IT consultant at Google, while her own business was gradually gaining momentum. Her Instagram page called Kuchikoch positioned her as an expert in high heels, a motivator, an entrepreneur, and a mother. Christina conducted personal training sessions with clients, organized master classes on learning to walk in high heels, and supported a company that promoted self-confidence, femininity, and a positive attitude towards one's own body. On her website, she described herself as a model, a Google recruiter, a Miss Switzerland finalist, the manager of the same competition, and a runway walk coach. Her clients included such well-known companies as Mercedes-Benz, HP, and Philips. In general, she transformed her modeling career into the path of a successful coach, inspiring the next generation of models. In addition, she helped Miss Switzerland contestants follow in her footsteps and taught business women to feel confident in their professional lives. In her personal life, Christina was a strong woman who dedicated herself to supporting and inspiring other women. But in addition to her career as a model, entrepreneur, and consultant, Christina was a loving wife and proud mother of 2 little daughters. Their names were Vera Kla, born in 2020, and Kira Safi, born in 2021. Judging by the numerous photos on the internet, it was clear how much she adored her family. Christina was a kind and welcoming person, just as beautiful on the inside as on the outside. From the outside, she seemed confident, intelligent, disciplined, and incredibly devoted to her family. However, while many people evoked only positive emotions in Christina, the same cannot be said about her husband. He also had friends, and Christina loved him. But many of her close ones saw in him a hot-tempered, capricious man. Marco Rabin was 41 years old. He was 3 years older than Christina. Marco was considered a respected leader in the field of change management in the Basel area. And in many ways, this was due to his father, who essentially ensured his future as a millionaire and lawyer. Before becoming a change management leader, Marco served as an officer in the Swiss Armed Forces, studied at the University of St. Gallen, and then, by rumor, continued his education at Stanford University. In addition, Marco ran his own business related to lean and agile methodologies, as well as continuous improvement. On his LinkedIn page, Marco described himself as a goal-driven entrepreneur. According to him, life is about people and their communication. Even judging by his posts on Twitter, Marco was an incredibly boring person. His life seemed as dull as the corporate world games in which he was immersed. In any case, in 2017, Marco and Christina got married. Their wedding was beautiful and took place in a castle overlooking the hills and fields. Later, they had 2 wonderful daughters. From the outside, everything seemed perfect, at least as it appeared on social media. On the internet, you can find many photographs in which they seem madly in love, picnics in the park, hugs on the floor, joint selfies at home, and vacations abroad. It was as if they had an ideal life, but behind closed doors, everything was not so simple. Christina's friends were extremely dissatisfied with Marco's behavior, especially in the last months before her death. One of her friends recalled that the couple was going through a crisis that had lasted for several months. The police were even called to their house after the situation escalated into violence. Based on the testimony of her friends, it became known that Marco had become obsessed with the children. He saw them as an ideal project, and he considered Christina to be just an obstacle. Marco put himself above everyone else, and this was especially evident on the children's birthdays, when he divided the guests into 2 camps. His family and her family celebrated separately. But neither Christina nor her family had any idea how dark a side Marco had. One of his former girlfriends told the prosecutor that Marco had repeatedly subjected her to brutal violence. And this continued until April 2016, just before he met Christina. Christina's ex-partner had already testified against him, recalling his terrible outbursts of anger. Once he ran over her leg with a car, and another time he threatened to throw her out of the car on the way home. He is also alleged to have grabbed her by the neck and forcefully pressed her against the wall. In the heat of arguments, Marco often lost control, which led to blows or strangulation attempts. And, as it turned out, Christina was not his first victim. Unaware of all this, Christina continued to post wonderful photos on social media, being convinced that Marco was the perfect husband who would never harm her. In old posts, she called him "my love" and proudly announced her second pregnancy. Just a few months before the tragedy, she shared a photo of her family with the caption, "My world," and the irony is that it was Marco who destroyed this world. Despite the fundamental principle of the presumption of innocence that we are obliged to respect, the available evidence and testimony against Marco speak for themselves. However, what really happened to Christina? Although the case has not yet been heard in court, we can share the information known at this time. Initially, Marco denied involvement in Christina's murder. He claimed that he found her body in the laundry room and in a state of panic dismembered it. However, realizing the weight of the evidence that incriminated him, he confessed to the murder, although he tried to justify himself, claiming that Christina allegedly attacked him with a knife. However, the examination refuted this version of events. The traces on her neck clearly indicated that the woman was strangled. But that's not all. The autopsy showed that Christina was beheaded using a hacksaw, knife, and garden shears. Marco also dislocated her hip joints and then completely dismembered the body. Moreover, during the dismemberment process, Marco watched videos on YouTube from his iPhone, but refuses to provide the password, which is likely an attempt to hide something. The most horrific thing was that Marco cut out only one organ, Christina's uterus, which prompted experts to conclude that the suspect might have a mental disorder. In addition, he ground some body parts in a powerful industrial blender, and dissolved others in a chemical solution. The fragments of the body that did not succumb to these two gruesome methods of destruction showed signs of blunt trauma inflicted before Christina's death. Among them were cuts on the cheek, chin, and nose, bruises on the leg and foot, as well as on the shoulder blades and the back of the head. A strand of hair had also been pulled out. Most of these horrific actions were committed in the laundry room, as evidenced by the traces and physical evidence found at the crime scene. Marco spent several hours working on his wife's body before returning to his usual life as if nothing had happened. He even looked Christina's father in the eye, had a drink with him, and assured him that Christina would soon return. Christina's father was persistent and deeply concerned. After a thorough search of the house, he came across the head of his daughter, which was probably the worst finding imaginable. In the interval between this gruesome discovery and the arrival of the police, Christina's father confronted Marco, who seemed stunned that his secret had been uncovered so quickly. And although it sounds incredible, during his arrest, Marco still tried to convince Christina's parents that they would see her again, which only emphasizes his complete lack of remorse and loss of touch with reality. What exactly drove Marco to murder his wife remains a mystery. Without the involvement of experts, one can only speculate and make too many assumptions. However, we have a confession, and we know from Christina's friends that she was planning to divorce Marco. Perhaps this is what drove him to the brink of madness. It is strange that after his arrest, Marco tried to obtain release on bail through the Court of Compulsory Measures in Basel. After the refusal, he appealed to the cantonal court, where he was also denied. Finally, he appealed to the federal court, but there too fortune did not smile upon him. According to the results of the investigation, Marco seems to have signs of a mental disorder. Experts also note a high level of criminal energy, a complete lack of empathy, and cold-bloodedness. His attempts to hide his wife's death and then behave as if nothing had happened in front of her father indicate clear and sociopathic traits. One of his friends noted that Marco felt no remorse. How crazy does one have to be to not show even a drop of emotion? There is no doubt that Marco will face trial for Christina's murder. The only question is whether he will be found guilty and what sentence he will receive. In Switzerland, the death penalty is prohibited, but for murder, a minimum sentence of 10 years and up to life imprisonment is provided. However, even a life sentence allows for the possibility of parole after 15 years. So, unfortunately, there is a chance that Marco may one day return to society. Moreover, Christina's family is now forced to fight for custody of her children. Her parents and sister have united to provide the girls with a safe and loving home. But Marco's sister also claims custody, arguing that Christina's parents are too old to care for them. This has escalated into a serious legal battle, with Marco's millionaire father and his lawyers assisting his sister. For Christina's family, this is an extremely exhausting struggle. Marco's actions should deprive him of any rights to the children. Christina's children deserve to grow up in a home where they will not be lied to about who their mother was and what happened to her. Moreover, Christina's family has already endured too much pain and loss. Losing grandchildren after the death of their daughter is just too much. Christina was a strong, self-confident, and extraordinary woman. She always radiated energy and new ideas, always supported her friends and family, and always listened. Despite her leadership qualities, she was a caring and loving mother, completely devoted to her children. Now these children have to grow up without their amazing mother. 8 months have passed since the tragic day when Christina's life was cut short. The house where life once flourished now stands empty and uninviting. The furniture may still be inside, but the windows are dark, and an oppressive silence hangs in the air. Flowers have been left at the doorstep in memory of the mistress, and in the backyard, where the children's laughter once rang out and the smell of grilled meat from the barbecue lingered, weeds now thrive. Christina's final resting place is always crowded. Her grave is drowning in flowers, and a photograph of the smiling woman adorns the gravestone. 2 crosses laid out with stone hearts and children's drawings all testify to the fact that Christina was sincerely loved and deeply missed. Her friend in an interview noted that one should not trust the perfect picture, as a terrible truth may be hidden behind it. It is important to be attentive not only to oneself, but also to those around. Christina's life was cut short too early and unfairly. She deserved a happy future, but fate had other plans. However, her strength of spirit, boundless love, and selflessness will forever remain in the hearts of her loved ones, friends, and children who will grow up with the memory of their incredible mother. This story is a painful reminder of the fragility of human life and the importance of fighting domestic violence. Because behind the perfect facade, beautiful social media photos, and smiling faces, a horrific reality may be hiding. Despite all the suffering and loss, life goes on. Christina's relatives do not give up, as they know they must fight for the truth and a worthy future for her children. This tragedy has shown that love and strength can withstand even the most terrible trials. And although Marco tried to destroy his family, he failed to break the unbreakable spirit of Christina and her loved ones. This story is not yet fully written, as the lives of Christina's daughters are just beginning. Although they are now experiencing the pain of loss, there are people around them who are ready to surround them with care and love. Perhaps one day, when the girls grow up, they will learn the whole truth. But they will also remember that their mother was not just a victim, but an embodiment of strength, love, and beauty that cannot be erased from memory. Let Christina's name become a symbol of the fact that even in the darkest times, a ray of light and hope can be found. And the main thing is not how her death occurred, but how her life was. A life that left a bright trail that will forever remain in the hearts of those who knew and loved her. Amanda Williams was born on April 18, 1977, in Cleveland, Ohio. She grew up in a large family where religion played a significant role in their lives. Amanda was an active member of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority and took great pride in her 2 children, who were her entire world. In addition, she had grandchildren and was a well-known and respected hairstylist in her district. On social media, Amanda often shared motivational and inspiring messages, trying to support her followers. She emphasized the importance of personal growth and encouraged people to focus on themselves and their development. The year 2023 was a turning point for Amanda. Drawing on her 25 years of experience as a hairstylist, she opened her own beauty salon in the heart of Cleveland. Despite the high probability of failure during the first 18 months of the salon's existence, 80%, Amanda's business not only survived but thrived. She managed to expand her client base and even launched her own line of hair care products. Amanda proudly celebrated the second anniversary of her salon, enjoying her success in business. Amanda's personal life was also going well. She lived with her partner, 40-year-old Tyrell Edwards, with whom she had been together for 6 years. Tyrell worked at a hospital and had a side job as a food delivery courier. Their relationship gradually developed, and the couple got engaged. On social media, Amanda shared happy moments with her fiancé, including a romantic Valentine's Day dinner and a trip to Las Vegas for her birthday, where they attended an Usher concert. However, despite the outward appearance of well-being, not everything was so cloudless in the couple's relationship. In October 2023, Amanda began to notice more and more alarming signs and was ready to make the difficult decision to break up. Although they were engaged, the couple attended a family therapist. Tyrell had no problems with the law, but his family and friends spoke about instances of physical and emotional abuse on his part towards Amanda. They recalled that in 2019, Tyrell was arrested for assault, and in 2020, a restraining court order was issued against him at the request of another woman who accused him of stalking and threats. According to friends, Amanda was planning to leave Tyrell. On the morning of October 9, 2023, the tension reached a critical point at the house on Sense Drive. Amanda returned from a cosmetology convention in Columbus and did not immediately respond to Tyrell's messages. This infuriated him, and the couple argued all day. In response, Amanda turned off the phone connection on Tyrell's mobile, forcing him to buy a new SIM card. The couple continued to argue in the basement, away from Amanda's daughter and granddaughter, who were upstairs. Amanda repeatedly demanded that Tyrell leave, and he finally began to pack his things. But in the evening, their fight escalated even more, and Tyrell called the police. Within a few minutes, a police car arrived at the house. Near the entrance, they found Amanda's body with gunshot wounds. An ambulance took her to the hospital, where she soon died from her injuries. Tyrell was detained by the police and questioned about the events of that day. He said that during the argument, Amanda grabbed a knife and would not let him out of the room. When she rushed at him, he had no choice but to shoot her 6 times. In the recordings from the surveillance cameras, he can be heard explaining to the police what happened. According to him, Amanda went upstairs with a knife in her hand, which he recorded on video. She snatched the phone and hit the screen with a knife, leaving cracks, and then threw the phone aside. The man said that the woman chased him around the room. He jumped on the bed, and she attacked him with a knife. Tyrell pulled out a gun from under the mattress and fired. He claimed that he tried to calm her down and asked her to put down the knife, but to no avail. Tyrell was released due to a lack of substantial evidence to press charges. The county police and the prosecutor stated that the investigation into the case was ongoing. Despite this, they asked for public assistance and urged people to share any important information. This state of affairs did not satisfy Amanda's family, who sought justice. Her brother Joey expressed his intention to fight for justice, as Amanda was loved by so many people. Amanda's mother could not come to terms with the loss of her daughter and the fact that she was not there with her at the crucial moment. She believed that her daughter was afraid for her children. The mother wanted justice so that she could move on. She stressed that Amanda did not deserve such a fate. Amanda's mother emphasized that her daughter did not deserve such a terrible fate. Amanda's brother, Joey, sought justice not only for his sister but for every woman who has become a victim of violence. The family's lawyer, Ian Friedman, expressed the opinion that no family should go through such suffering. He assured Amanda's mother that she should not blame herself, as she was bravely defending the memory of her daughter. Friedman assured that he would provide the court with all the necessary evidence to reconstruct a complete picture of the crime and achieve justice. Amanda's family and friends launched a campaign on social media aimed at putting pressure on the authorities and getting a more thorough investigation. Their efforts paid off. 23 days after Amanda's death, the police released a press release stating that they had handed over all the collected investigation materials to the chief judge. The judge made the decision to press charges in the case of Amanda Williams' murder. Soon after, the prosecutor's office issued an arrest warrant for Tyrell Edwards, the main suspect in committing this crime. The prosecutor stated that the results of the investigation led them to the conclusion that Tyrell's claims of self-defense were part of a premeditated plan to take Amanda's life. Edwards was charged with aggravated murder, assault, and domestic violence. Despite the issued arrest warrant, the suspect could not be found. Law enforcement demanded that he turn himself in, which Tyrell did on November 3. He was released on $1 million bail. The trial of Edwards began 4 months later, on February 27, 2024. The prosecutor expressed confidence that his investigation had revealed the true picture of the events of that fatal day. The jury had to determine whether Tyrell Edwards really shot Amanda in self-defense or if it was a deliberate murder. During the court hearing, the prosecution stated that the defendant shot Amanda 6 times with a revolver, taking her life in her own bedroom. The prosecutor also noted that the woman had repeatedly asked the man to leave, but he refused. In contrast, Edwards' lawyer argued that his client acted to save his life from the threat of being stabbed with a knife and that this was the only possible way out of the situation. The first to testify in court was the forensic expert, Dr. Ingrid Mooney. She reported that the cause of Amanda's death was gunshot wounds. Although there were 6 shots, 8 wounds were found on the victim's body. The expert explained this by the fact that one shot could cause several injuries. The jury was shown a video recording made by Tyrell on his phone on the day of the tragedy. Gunshots can be heard on it. Amanda declares that she will defend herself, and Edwards urges her to calm down. The video shows the couple in their bedroom. Amanda holds a knife in her hands and orders Tyrell to get out of her house. Then she approaches him and snatches the phone. However, the recording continues, and shots can be heard on it. The prosecutor pointed out that the video does not show Edwards asking Amanda to put down the knife, nor can he be heard warning her about having a gun and intending to shoot. The prosecutor also noted that later in the recording, Tyrell approaches the bed and takes out the gun that Amanda kept under the mattress, while the woman herself is at a distance from him and is not approaching. In court, Edwards spoke about his relationship with Amanda. According to him, they were engaged and planning a wedding. To better prepare for married life, the couple attended a family therapist. Tyrell described their relationship as quite good. On October 9, 2023, the day of the tragedy, Edwards and Williams, as it later became known in court, were arguing in correspondence. Upon returning home, Tyrell wanted to leave the argument in the past, while Amanda insisted that he leave. The man noticed that something was wrong with her. Her eyes were red as if bloodshot. He did not want to go, so Amanda warned him. She said that if he stayed, he should be afraid of her and be on guard. Tyrell said that after that, she went to the bedside table where she kept 2 guns. He took the weapons and carried them to the car. When he returned to the house, Edwards found Amanda talking to the police on the phone. At that moment, he decided to gather his things and leave. It was then, according to him, that Amanda took a knife, and he began to film the events on the phone. In court, Tyrell claimed that Williams rushed at him with a knife, but the video shows her placing it on the stair railing. Edwards admitted that he poorly remembers the details but recalled that at some point, Amanda returned to take the knife again. The conflict between Amanda and Tyrell reached its climax when the woman snatched the phone from his hands. Edwards jumped on the bed and pulled out a 3rd gun from there. He recalled how Williams was hitting the phone screen with a knife and then began to approach him. At that moment, he took out a gun from under the mattress. Frightened, Tyrell shot Amanda several times. The lawyer asked why he opened fire if the argument seemed to be gradually subsiding. Why didn't he tell her he had a gun? Why didn't he ask her to stop? Edwards replied that he did not want to shoot her, that he tried to escape, but she attacked him. However, during cross-examination, Tyrell's testimony changed. The defense attorney pointed out that the sounds on the video are the blows of the knife on the phone. At that time, the gun was already in Edwards' hands. Previously, he claimed that he fired 4 to 5 shots and then intended to call the police. It was then that Amanda's daughter, Tyler, ran into the room, and Tyrell led her out. According to him, he did not want to traumatize the girl, so he did not let her inside. The prosecutor emphasized that Williams lowered the knife before moving towards Edwards. The lawyer argued that she could have returned for the knife when Tyrell was not filming her. The forensic expert noted that the neck injury would have paralyzed Amanda, and she would not have been able to hold the knife. After reviewing all the evidence, the jury proceeded to reach a verdict in the case of Tyrell Edwards. The judge familiarized himself with the forms filled out by the jury and asked the defendant to stand up. Regarding the charge of aggravated murder, the jury found Edwards not guilty. This verdict was signed by all 12 members of the jury. However, on the point of actual murder, the jury unanimously found Tyrell guilty. When the judge read out the verdict, Amanda's father left the courtroom. Edwards was found guilty of murder, assault, and domestic violence. A week later, a sentencing hearing was held. The judge urged those present to maintain order and reminded them that the police were responsible for security in the courtroom. He warned that in case of improper behavior, law enforcement officers would have every reason to take the necessary measures. The judge also asked to turn off and put away mobile phones. The prosecutor took the floor. In his speech, he emphasized that the use of weapons creates dangerous situations for victims of domestic violence. This is exactly what happened to Amanda. The prosecutor read out a message that had already been heard during the trial and reminded how Tyrell muttered after committing the crime, "Why did you take that knife?" Amanda answered this, and her words are clearly recorded on the video, "To protect myself." Edwards insisted that he had never laid a hand on Williams. He told the police about Amanda's actions but did not mention his own. On November 27, 2020, Williams sent a message to Edwards. In it, she wrote how ashamed she was to look at herself in the mirror, how humiliating it was to walk around beaten. In response, Tyrell wrote that he was glad that they were both strong personalities and that Amanda was feeling better. He also apologized for his actions. The prosecutor noted that by doing so, Edwards did not deny what he had done and admitted that he had kicked Williams in the face. Further, Tyrell wrote that he wished they loved each other. Amanda replied that their relationship would never be the same as before. In Williams' phone, photographs of her face taken at the hospital were found. The prosecutor also noted that Amanda's daughter, Tyler, was unaware of the problems in her mother's relationship with her stepfather. On Williams' phone, there was another photograph in which she was with her son, and her face was hidden behind a mask. Amanda did not show the bruises to her family. Edwards was aware of his actions, but in court, he behaved as if he had his own version of events. He claimed that he had not caused Williams any harm. The lawyer reminded that during his testimony, Tyrell said that when Amanda was hitting the phone screen with a knife, she was focused on the device and not on him at that moment. This indicated that she did not pose a threat. In addition, the defense attorney pointed out that Edwards did not ask Williams to stop and did not try to defuse the situation. He had that opportunity, but instead, he decided to kill the woman. The prosecutor insisted on a severe punishment for the defendant. Amanda's family, friends, and work colleagues gathered in the courtroom. They were all filled with grief over the loss of a loved one. Their pain and sorrow were impossible to put into words. Next to speak at the hearing was the brother of the deceased woman. Without holding back his emotions, he said that he and Amanda had grown up together. She was like a mother to him and made him the person he is today. Amanda's brother said that she was special and always tried to do the right thing. He compared Tyrell to a wolf in sheep's clothing and noted that although he was glad to have met him, he now knows how to protect his daughters from people like him. The man called Edwards a cunning manipulator capable of turning any situation to his advantage. Joey could not forgive Tyrell for what he had done. He emphasized that the killer had a choice to act differently, but instead, he did what he had planned from the very beginning. Amanda's brother could not understand how Edwards dared to take such a terrible step. Joey recalled how, during a family dinner, Tyrell asked for his permission to marry Amanda. And although he gave his blessing then, now, after everything that had happened, he considered himself guilty. It was excruciatingly painful for the man to think that his sister's children would realize the full horror of this tragedy. All he wanted was for Edwards to be behind bars until Amanda's daughter was old enough to be able to forgive the killer. At the end of the hearing, the judge noted that no amount of time would help come to terms with this terrible tragedy. He then read out the verdict to the defendant. Tyrell Edwards was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to early release after serving 15 years. An additional 9 years were added to this term for the use of a firearm during the commission of the crime. Thus, Edwards received life imprisonment with the possibility of release only after 24 years. The financial sector is a sphere where constant tension reigns, especially when the company's financial success depends on the decisions made. In just one day, you can hit the jackpot or lose everything, ending up in debt or even jobless. But the worst is when such circumstances break a person, and they are ready to do something terrible. Today we will talk about one such case, when the world of the main character fell to pieces, and he took more than a dozen lives with him to the grave. Mark Barton was born in April 1955 in Stockbridge, Georgia, USA, into a military family. Mark's childhood was spent in constant moves across the country with his parents. Already in his quite mature teenage years, his family moved to South Carolina. It was then that his parents' marriage began to fall apart, as his mother was not happy with the need to frequently change their place of residence. She filed for divorce and continued to raise her son on her own, although he did not sever ties with his father, who did not want to completely break off the relationship. From an early age, Mark was a withdrawn boy who seemed emotionally detached and had difficulty communicating with other children. Perhaps it was this, or maybe just ordinary teenage curiosity that pushed the adolescent to experiment with illegal substances. This happened during the heyday and formation of the hippie subculture with all its consequences. Mark quickly got hooked on and was even caught red-handed several times during thefts from pharmacies, but this did not have serious consequences. Despite everything, young Mark managed to enter college. He became a student at Clemson University, where he earned a degree in chemistry. But even in his student years, the young man continued to struggle with his addiction. Already after graduation, he was arrested again for theft, the purpose of which was to get money for another dose. This incident occurred just a month after Mark received his diploma. It was only by a miracle that he managed to avoid problems with his studies, because if he were still a student, he would definitely have been expelled. But even after that, fate continued to smile upon Mark, allowing him to get out of trouble unscathed, regardless of the severity of his misdeeds and mistakes. Although it was obvious that this could not go on forever. All these events took place at the height of the psychedelic boom of the 1960s in the United States, when the use of illegal substances became widespread. The hero of this story was no exception. Having the appropriate education, knowledge, and enthusiasm, Mark decided to try manufacturing illegal on his own. This led to several cases of overdose during experiments, due to which he ended up in the hospital. But each time, the young man's life was saved. Many people thought that Mark had several personalities living inside him. One of them was a diligent straight-A student who brilliantly graduated from university with a degree in chemistry. The other was an addicted person with mental health issues. By 1979, Mark, although he had a solid knowledge in his field of science, was still continuing his battle with his passion for It was then that he moved to Georgia, where fate brought him together with his future wife, Deborah Spivey. Their relationship developed rapidly, and soon the couple got married. At first, Mark got a job, and then his employer sent him to Alabama, where the hero of the story got a position as co-manager of a company specializing in chemical production. But due to his already known problems, Mark lost this job quite quickly. During that period, the young man's psychological state began to deteriorate rapidly. As Deborah confessed, she repeatedly witnessed paranoid outbursts, a kind of breakdowns in her husband's behavior. He constantly feared that someone wanted to kill him, was overly nervous, and behaved strangely. Mark was convinced that he was being watched and eavesdropped on, but despite everything, Deborah loved her husband and sought to support him in every possible way. Over the years of married life, the couple had 2 children, a son, Matthew, and a daughter, Michelle. But over time, the atmosphere in the house began to change for the worse. Against the backdrop of Mark's deteriorating mental health, he increasingly demonstrated manipulative and controlling character traits, especially in his attitude towards his wife. The situation quickly spiraled out of control, and the woman began to fear that her husband could pose a danger to both herself and the children. Deborah repeatedly shared with her loved ones that Mark had begun to look at her with a kind of eerie gaze that frightened the woman. Against this backdrop, the man was fired from his job once again due to complaints from colleagues about his inappropriate behavior. As far as Deborah knew, during that period, Mark continued to use illegal substances. An interesting incident occurred literally the day after being fired from the company. It turned out that someone had hacked into the corporate computers and stolen a large amount of valuable information. Of course, Mark denied any involvement in this incident. However, the investigation quickly got on his trail and proved that he was the one responsible for breaking into the databases. The hero of the story was even arrested, but unexpectedly, the company dropped most of the charges against him. So at first, he was released, and then given a short prison term. It later emerged that Mark had been illegally manufacturing a certain chemical and selling it. At the same time, he was one of the founders of this organization, so the company decided not to tarnish its reputation by drawing attention to such an incident. Thanks to this, Mark managed to get off almost scot-free, as records of his criminal activity simply disappeared. The employers told the police that the conflict had been peacefully resolved after the scandal, which they managed to hush up. Later, the family, along with the children, moved to Atlanta, Georgia. Mark quickly managed to find a prestigious position in a manufacturing company, which, by tradition, was also related to the chemical industry. In addition, he began working as a sales representative for chemicals in another organization. During that period, Deborah told her loved ones that Mark's condition had significantly improved. She felt positive emotions about their marriage, and believed that they had managed to save the relationship. This was important to her, as the mother did not want to traumatize the children with their parents' divorce. At that time, Mark became calmer and even seemed to have stopped using. However, there were more mundane reasons behind this. Once at work, he met a girl named Leanne Lynx, who was only 20 years old at the time. She got a job as a secretary at the company where Mark was a dealer. Sparks immediately flew between them, which later grew into a stormy romance. The hero of the story fell head over heels in love with the girl. Their secret relationship lasted quite a long time. By 1993, it might have seemed that there were no problems at all in Mark's life. He looked great, played sports, earned a decent income, stopped using. He had a loving wife, wonderful children, and even a mistress. Everything seemed cloudless until Deborah began to suspect her husband of marital infidelity. At first, she tried to reassure herself with the thought that Mark was going through a midlife crisis, as he had indeed begun to take better care of himself and even look younger. However, more disturbing thoughts about her husband's unfaithfulness also crept into the woman's mind. The hero of the story assured that he had no mistresses, and that he simply wanted to prolong his youth in this way. In early 1993, Mark purchased a life insurance policy for his wife in the amount of $600,000. It later turned out that he even tried to arrange an even more expensive policy for $1 million but could not gather enough funds to pay for such high insurance. In June 1993, Leigh Ann and Mark went on a trip together. He traveled with his mistress for several days, explaining to his wife that it was a business visit to a neighboring state. During this trip, Mark confessed his love to the girl. He was ready to do anything to be with her. He even planned to leave his wife and marry Leigh Ann. The girl agreed, but on the condition that the man must first divorce. However, contrary to expectations, the wife did not agree to the divorce. Even by the end of the summer of 1993, she continued to refuse. All this threatened to turn into a large-scale divorce process that could drag on for a year or more, given the number of controversial issues. At that time, the couple was working with a lawyer on family matters. As expected, the process was delayed, as it was necessary to draw up plans for custody of the children, their upbringing, and also resolve the issue of alimony. All this required time, especially since the couple had serious disagreements on many issues. In early September 1993, Deborah decided to go on a weekend trip to the lake with her mother and family. Everyone knew that the couple was going through a crisis. However, people believed that they were holding on and trying to solve all their problems. Life went on as usual. Deborah invited her husband to join the trip and wanted to take the children with her. But the daughter fell ill, and the son Matthew, who was a Boy Scout, had to go on an important hike on the same weekend. Mark told his wife that he would stay at home with the children. He suggested that the woman go to the lake with her mother, and the two of them would spend time together. Deborah agreed to her husband's proposal and did not refuse her plans, going to the lake. Her mother was supposed to join her there. The last time both women were seen was on the evening of September 4, 1993. There was no sign of trouble, everything seemed calm and ordinary. But on Monday, something unexpected happened. The women did not return home at the appointed time. Deborah's father tried to contact his daughter and wife, but all attempts were in vain. They simply ignored the calls. Mark also said that he knew nothing about their whereabouts. Eventually, Deborah's father went to the police to request a welfare check and provided the address of the house by the lake. When they arrived at the scene, the police received no response to their knocking on the door. A few minutes passed, the officers walked around the area but noticed nothing suspicious. The only thing that caught their attention was the cars parked in the driveway. It seemed that the owners had not gone anywhere and should be either in the house or somewhere nearby. However, no trace of either woman was found. The police noticed a trailer on the property that appeared to be unlocked. Deciding to go inside, they saw a horrific sight. 36-year-old Deborah and her 59-year-old mother Loisa had been brutally beaten to death. The killer was no longer at the crime scene. Judging by everything, the perpetrator had used an axe or a bat. The entire trailer was covered in blood inside. The attack had occurred with extreme cruelty. The women simply had no chance of survival. Chaos reigned all around, clearly indicating a struggle or a search for valuables. The strange thing was that nothing was missing. The only thing the criminal took was Deborah's wedding ring. All other valuables, such as the gun on the kitchen counter and a few $100s in cash in the victim's bags, remained untouched. No signs of a break-in were found. It seemed that the victims were familiar with their abuser. It is quite possible that they were careless and did not lock the doors, which allowed the killer to burst inside unhindered. For the police, Mark Barton immediately became the main suspect. He had a financial motive, the insurance. In addition, he was clearly not happy about the upcoming problems associated with the divorce, alimony, and issues of child custody. It was obvious that Deborah had enough leverage to turn the situation in her favor. So it was most profitable for him to get rid of his wife, taking advantage of the opportunity to kill her in a remote area without witnesses. Unfortunately, there were not even surveillance cameras at the crime scene. Immediately after the funeral, the the police went to search Mark's house, but nothing incriminating was found, except for his wife's life insurance policy. The investigators were also interested in the main suspect's car. There they managed to find a few drops of blood on the steering wheel and the ignition lock. The man explained their appearance by a recent deep cut on his finger. Unfortunately, the blood samples were not suitable for analysis. It was not even possible to establish whether they belonged to a person, since all the stains were doused with a carbonated drink and spoiled. It remained a mystery how Mark managed to spill an almost sticky sweet drink all over the interior. But he attributed everything to chance. In any case, this interfered with a full-fledged analysis of the samples. Therefore, the hero of the story was released after interrogation. Several witnesses who were with Mark and his son on the hike said that he had left for a few hours and was absent. This time would have been enough to carry out the massacre. In fact, the man had no unassailable alibi. Nevertheless, after some time, the case was closed. Deborah's relatives were shocked that the couple's children, Michelle and Matthew, were left without a mother, and the perpetrator was never punished. The detectives just threw up their hands. Almost immediately after the double murder, people around began to notice oddities in Mark Barton's behavior. A week after he became a widower, his mistress Lee and moved into the house. She began to behave like a mistress and even tried to become a mother to Mark's children. After the case was closed, Mark received an insurance payout for his wife's death, but not in full, only half, $294,000. He was dissatisfied with the amount and sued the insurance company. As a result, the payout was increased to $450,000. At the same time, $150,000 of this was transferred to a trust fund for the children. The man told everyone that he was crazy about his new mistress, that he had never loved anyone like that before. So it came as no surprise to anyone when he and Lee got married soon after. Now Mark had enough money for various experiments. Therefore, he decided to quit his job and start a new business. He became a trader in a brokerage firm. It is also known that during that period he actively played gambling. Some time after his wife's death, the man's emotional state deteriorated. Trading, which at first seemed like a profitable business, began to bring losses. Mark made one mistake after another, having neither the appropriate financial education nor experience. At the same time, he put large sums at stake, which he lost one after another. As a result, by June 1999, he had not only squandered his entire fortune but also had debts of $105,000 for securities that he was entrusted with in the company where he worked. All this was the result of numerous unsuccessful deals that he made during that period. Eventually, Mark lost his trading license. He was fired, but he was not going to give up. The man got a job in another company, Momentum Securities, where he was also engaged in trading technology investments in the stock markets. The office of this firm was located right across the street from Mark's previous place of work. No one even suspected that at that time he was experiencing the peak of his struggle with mental problems. Difficulties began again. Instead of profits, the hero of the story began to bring losses. Therefore, he was fired for the second time. On July 29, 1999, Mark came to the office of his former employer, Momentum Securities, in Atlanta. Once inside, he chatted with several former colleagues who recognized him. They did not notice anything suspicious. Later, these people said that Mark's behavior after this innocent conversation shocked them. He said, "I hope this doesn't ruin your trading day," and then he suddenly pulled out 2 pistols and opened fire. 4 people died instantly. Before fleeing the office, Mark tried to kill his former boss and mentor, Brad Schumacher, shooting him 3 times. It seemed that Mark and Brad Schumacher had a rather respectful professional relationship. But apparently, Mark himself had a different opinion on this matter. Fortunately, Brad survived the triple shot. It became clear that this was not a chaotic act of aggression. Mark knew exactly where he was going. He purposefully arrived at the office of the company from which he had been fired for embezzlement and where he had previously worked. But Mark did not stop there. Further, in his plans, there was a continuation of the bloody massacre in the neighboring building, where he had also once worked and from where he had been fired. Taking advantage of the general panic and fuss, he calmly crossed the street. As soon as he entered the hall, he came across an office manager named Kevin Young. Without saying a word to him, Mark simply aimed his gun at him and shot him in the chest. The man died on the spot. Shooting started here too, during which Mark shot 3 traitors. Mass hysteria ensued. People in a panic tried to save their lives by running away. When the list of the shooter's victims grew by 5 more people, he headed to the conference room and began shooting the employees who were there. The first wounded was the company's co-founder, the same man who had once personally hired Mark. By the time the police surrounded the building, the hero of the story was long gone. Somehow Mark managed to escape. But one of the witnesses noticed how he, breaking through the crowd, got into a green minivan and disappeared. This person managed to remember the car's license plate number. He passed this information on to the police officers who arrived at the scene. Thanks to this, law enforcement officers were able to establish the identity of the suspect by running the car through the database. Unfortunately, it was not possible to locate the criminal immediately. He disappeared in an unknown direction, and attempts to track the car did not bring any results. Therefore, law enforcement agencies were forced to turn to the media. In order to report what had happened, it was necessary to bring the information to the general public and involve any potential witnesses in the case. At the very least, it was necessary to warn people that an armed and extremely dangerous criminal was at large. Messages from citizens began to arrive at the police station within the first 30 minutes. One of the gas station employees saw Mark stop there in his car. He filled up a full tank and drove away. 4 hours later, a girl turned to the police department. She said that some stranger had attacked her on the street. He aimed a weapon at her and threatened her. Fortunately, the girl managed to escape from the criminal. She was frightened to death when she saw on TV the photograph of the man who had carried out the mass shooting and recognized her attacker in him. The police assumed that Mark probably wanted to take a hostage in order to escape. Thanks to the girl's appeal, it was possible to establish the approximate direction of the criminal's movement, and a large-scale pursuit began, which ended quite quickly. Mark was cornered and surrounded. When the police with weapons began to surround the car, a shot rang out. The 44-year-old main character of this story, realizing that his escape plan had failed and that he would not be able to avoid arrest, shot himself in the head. He simply put a bullet in his temple, thus evading justice. Now the investigation had to find out what exactly happened and what made this man take up arms. Detectives came to the house where Mark lived, aiming to talk to his second wife. But they could not get in touch with her. Therefore, suspicions arose that she could have fled. The investigators had reason to believe that the wife could have been an accomplice to her criminal husband. Law enforcement officers were looking for any clues that could point to this probable accomplice, who may have still been harboring bloody plans. It seemed strange that a well-educated traitor just took up arms and started killing. However, what the police found in the house did not at all coincide with their expectations. In the closet of the marital bedroom, they found Lee and beaten to death, and in other rooms of the house, the bodies of Barton's 2 children, Michelle and Matthew. The son and daughter were also brutally beaten to death in their own beds. The children's bodies were covered with sheets up to their necks, and their heads were wrapped in pillows so that only their faces were visible. The murder weapon was also found in the house. The criminal used a bat, which he used to smash the heads of each of his relatives. As forensic experts were able to find out, Mark had dealt with his wife 2 days before he staged the shooting at the trading companies. And the day after her murder, he took the lives of his own children. In the living room, the police found a note printed on a printer explaining the circumstances of the terrible crime. According to this note, on the morning of July 27, 1999, Mark Barton woke up at home and decided that Lee and must die. That's when he carried out his gruesome plan. In the note, Barton claimed that before this, he had arranged an unforgettable weekend for his children, which he regarded as a farewell. What actually happened at those moments is not exactly known. It is quite possible that the children were actually held hostage and had no way to escape. After Mark had beaten all his relatives to death, he left notes on their bodies. Having covered each one with a sheet, he placed symbolic gifts on the chests of his children. A teddy bear and a handwritten note lay on Michelle. A similar letter was on Matthew's body. In addition, the father left a video game on his son's chest. All these notes were dated July 29, 1999, at 6:38 a.m. Mark did not indicate the real reason for his act, apparently believing that no one would understand him. But he explained that he had come to hate life and the whole system of values. This hatred had been gradually growing for several months until he made such a radical decision. The man insisted that he loved everyone who had become his victims. He expressed the hope that he would meet them in heaven. According to him, he tried to kill them as quickly and painlessly as possible. Having made sure that they were dead, Mark decided that it would be too hard for the children without their parents. Therefore, he considered it necessary to take them with him. The note said that he was sure that God would take care of them in the next life. But before going there, Mark intended to take as many lives as possible of those people who, in his subjective opinion, wished him dead. Probably, it was the move to Alabama that became the beginning of the end for him. His first wife, while still alive, told her loved ones that after that move, Mark began to suffer from paranoia. And his work productivity began to drop rapidly. Eventually, this became the reason for his dismissal at the initiative of the employer. Later, Mark was caught sabotaging company data. The management decided not to blow this incident out of proportion. Of course, they could not leave Mark unpunished either. But at the same time, it was not profitable for them to attract too much attention to their newcomer company in the market and discredit it in the eyes of competitors. It all ended with a short term of imprisonment, which Mark served after the incident with the sabotage of company data. But now, when he had squandered all the money and survived several job layoffs, the man seemed to have lost any desire to live. The police immediately noticed the similarity with the murder of Mark's first wife, Deborah Spivey, and her mother, who were just as brutally beaten to death in a trailer. All this time, Mark remained the main suspect in that case. However, he always denied his involvement in the murder of his ex-wife and her mother. Even in his note, he denied his guilt in that crime. Instead, Mark confessed to beating his last wife and 2 children from his previous marriage to death while they were sleeping. He claimed that he did it quickly, smashing their heads with a bat so that they would not feel pain. In the note, Mark described in detail his state before the murder of his relatives. He woke up in the middle of the night, feeling an all-consuming hatred for everything around him. The only salvation from these feelings seemed to him to be death. But the madman did not want to leave this life alone. So he decided to first deal with his closest people, then kill as many of those he considered his abusers as possible, and only after that, take his own life. Mark continued to insist that he loved his children and wife with all his heart, but they still had to die. What exactly made him blame everyone around him for his colossal losses of money in the stock markets remained a mystery. None of the colleagues who worked side by side with Mark could understand the reasons for such frenzied aggression. Moreover, Mark's victims were ordinary office workers who simply performed their routine work. They did nothing to harm him and were in no way to blame for his professional failures and dismissals. And although the man clearly denied his involvement in the double murder of Deborah and her mother, committed in 1993, the police were still convinced of his guilt. This was indicated by several weighty facts. First, a very similar modus operandi of the crime. In both cases, a bat served as the murder weapon. Secondly, only Mark had a serious motive for the massacre. Thirdly, he had access to the lake house and was one of the few who knew that Deborah and her mother were there. After all, outsiders rarely appeared in that area. As it turned out, the neighbors were aware of the constant conflicts and quarrels between Mark and his first wife Deborah. Therefore, they also had no doubt that it was he who killed her. One can only guess what really happened behind the closed doors of the Barton couple's house. A telling incident occurred in February 1994, when Mark's daughter Michelle, who was only 2.5 years old at the time, told the kindergarten that her dad had molested her. It is quite likely that this had happened before and could have been another reason for Mark to get rid of his first wife. After the girl's complaint, an investigation was conducted, but the case did not proceed due to the child's confused testimony and the absence of any evidence. However, now it is impossible to prove Mark's involvement in the death of Deborah and her mother, because the only person who could confess to the crime and reveal all its details has passed away. In the opinion of the authorities, the motive for the murder of the first wife could well have been the insurance compensation that Mark received immediately after her death. He used this money to finance his career as a trader. Mark preferred high-risk investments in IT companies, which ultimately did not meet his expectations. Detectives believe that in his note, Mark was untruthful when he claimed that only death seemed to him the only way out of the situation. And that allegedly, that is why he decided to take his second wife and children with him. After all, after their murder, Mark did not commit suicide but staged a shooting at work, after which he tried to escape. Obviously, he intended to start a new life. And this indicates that initially, Mark was not planning to die but decided on suicide only when he realized that he could end up behind bars, which he was very afraid of. As a result of Mark's bloody actions, 9 of his former colleagues and 3 members of his own family were killed. Another 13 people were injured but were able to survive the attack. At the time of the tragedy, Mark's son and daughter were 8 and 11 years old, respectively, and his young wife Lee Ann had turned 27. Among the victims of the shooting were 7 traders, the youngest of whom had barely turned 30, and the oldest was already 60. In addition, Mark killed a 36-year-old office manager and a 43-year-old computer course student who worked at Alltech Investment Group. Many still believe that Mark Barton's first wife and her mother should also be added to this mournful list. And even in 2024, this terrible massacre remains the largest shooting in terms of the number of victims in the history of the state of Georgia. Choosing a life partner is an extremely important step, as experienced people in countless books never tire of repeating. However, few talk about the difficulties and challenges that await a young couple in the future. This story demonstrates how crucial it is that a relationship doesn't turn into a tragedy. Around 9 a.m. on November 27, 2017, a disturbing call came into the Coffee County Sheriff's Office in Alabama. A witness reported that an acquaintance of his had apparently taken her own life. Police officers immediately rushed to a house owned by a local church. It had previously served as a pastor's residence but had recently been rented out at a discounted rate, but only to parishioners. The last tenant of this dwelling was a recently divorced mother of 4 named Sarah Starr. She was 38 and had been married for 16 years. It was a difficult relationship that she had finally found the courage to end. But doing so proved to be far from easy. The divorce process dragged on for a full 2 years. Now Sarah was trying to find her place in life. She had become a single mother with 4 children to care for, without her husband's support. She had to take on all the parental responsibilities, including providing for the children's needs, as her husband initially did not help. The woman's world had been turned upside down. However, in the absence of her confrontational husband, who had constantly pressured her, life seemed to have become simpler and safer. Sarah Starr was born in 1979 in the small town of Colby, Kansas. She was a wonderful mother who adored her children and easily fulfilled her parental duties. From a young age, she quickly found common ground with children. That's why, even in her youth, she decided to become a teacher. Sarah got an education and started working at a local elementary school, where she taught literature and writing. She loved her job very much, and everyone who interacted with her during and outside of classes could feel it. People spoke of Sarah as a sensitive and balanced woman who got along wonderfully with children and knew how to get them interested in the learning material. Her marriage began back in February 2001 when 22-year-old Sarah married Jason. At that time, she was finishing her studies at Kansas State University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in education. Jason was 28, having just returned from serving in the Army, found a job, and was gradually adjusting to civilian life. He already had one marriage behind him, which had produced a son. But due to misunderstandings with his first wife, he divorced and remarried Sarah, whom he immediately captivated with her sensitivity and attractive appearance. Initially, Sarah and Jason's marriage was stable and peaceful. The woman told everyone how well things were going for them. However, there was every reason to believe that Jason was not treating her as gently as she said. Gradually, more and more people had such suspicions as they observed the couple's interactions. The man often insulted and humiliated the woman in public. But she smoothed over all the sharp edges. For years after the wedding, the couple had twins. 5 years later, another pair of twins was born. It was quite a rare coincidence. However, it could also have been a natural outcome, given how much Sarah loved children. She was over the moon with happiness at becoming a mother of many, which could not be said of her husband. At this time, the couple lived in a remote area in the small town of Colby, Kansas. This is where they were born and raised, but now they decided to move and chose Coffee County in Alabama. They rented a house. In the new place, Jason got a job, and later, in addition to his main activity, he took up entrepreneurship. Sarah became a housewife who had to take care of 4 young children and do the housework. Of course, it was not easy. The woman felt a huge burden, but in general, she coped with her responsibilities. At the same time, the money earned by her husband was not enough. The young woman had to go to work at the school part-time. The load on Sarah increased significantly, and she barely kept up with all her duties, while her husband hardly helped her. The story's heroine found support among the faithful. She became a devoted parishioner of the local Baptist church and quickly fit into her new environment thanks to her gentle nature and sociability. She had a wonderful sense of humor and many hobbies, including gardening and photography. By 2016, Sarah was working as a 4th-grade teacher at a local elementary school. She was described as a very positive and friendly woman, but behind this joyful mask, something gloomy was hiding. The situation at home was not so cloudless. Here Jason created an oppressive atmosphere. Things got especially worse after the birth of the second set of twins. The children became so numerous that Jason began to perceive them as a burden. He constantly lashed out at his wife because of the children's noise, lack of sleep, or the mess the kids made. The wife realized that she was tired of this relationship but had nowhere to go. As soon as Sarah was able to get a job and get settled in a new place, the young mother realized that she could count on financial independence from her husband. The toxic relationship could no longer continue, but the business her husband was engaged in, the 4 children, the division of property and custody, all this could become an obstacle. Despite the inevitable difficulties, Sarah moved out of her husband's house without any warning into a house provided to her by the church for a token fee and initiated the divorce process. However, it was destined to drag on for a full 2 years. According to Jason, during this entire period, the woman was in a stressful state, which was especially clearly manifested in the so-called frivolous spending. According to him, Sarah had a tendency to spend his money on absolutely unnecessary things. She was a real shopaholic. This situation only worsened when she became a single mother. Now the problem with frivolous spending only intensified, to the point that Sarah experienced financial difficulties. Fortunately, she had support in the church, and they did not leave her to fend for herself in a difficult moment, providing the necessary assistance. Sarah was a caring mother and did an excellent job with all her responsibilities. But against the backdrop of life's adversities, Sarah's condition somewhat deteriorated. She was very nervous, often quarreled with her husband, slept poorly, and felt mild depression. At the same time, the woman refused the help of psychotherapists, limiting herself to taking antidepressants. When Sarah was about to move out of the house where she lived with Jason, she asked her friends, the couple Dana and Lawrence, to help. They recalled how agitated Sarah was while the move was going on. The story's heroine tried to load her car very quickly, forgot many things, so she had to run from the house to the street several times to return for the left-behind items. All this fuss looked suspicious, as if Sarah's emotional state was unstable. She was most worried that her husband might return right in the midst of the move. She really didn't want to see him, so that he would find out about it this way and could interfere with her. Jason did show up, but it happened not at his house, but when Sarah arrived at her new home with her friends. The woman instantly ran inside. Lawrence met the man at the doorstep, blocking his way into the house. He stood up for his wife's friend, asked Jason not to go inside, and the man obeyed. The uninvited guest remained near the house for some time before leaving. Lawrence remembered that when Jason appeared, Sarah was terrified. She was literally shaking and crying, so afraid of him. When the man left, the story's heroine remained tense and agitated for a long time, barely holding back her hysteria. The teacher was convinced that Jason had come to kill her. He had previously threatened her with violence if she left him. This meeting took place at the very beginning of the separation, and 2 years after these events, the divorce process was finally completed. As a result, it was decided to split custody of the children between the father and mother. At that time, their twins were 9 and 7 years old, respectively. Jason was also obliged to pay alimony monthly, both for the children and for his wife, who was not yet firmly on her feet. The divorce hit the man's financial position quite hard. He had to transfer $3,500 a month. At that time, Jason earned just over $6,000 a month, which meant that the court obligated him to pay more than half of his earnings to his ex-wife. At the same time, she did not receive rights to her husband's business and property, so she continued to live in the church house. Jason also moved, but to a house located not far from his ex-wife's dwelling, somewhere near his mother's house. On November 27, 2017, Sarah was supposed to go to work after Thanksgiving, but that morning she never showed up to the classroom. This was completely out of character for the responsible woman. Colleagues could not get through to her. She was ignoring messages on messengers. Such uncharacteristic behavior caused concern among the other teachers, who began to wonder if something alarming had happened. One of the story's heroine's colleagues was sent to check on her personally. The colleague's worst fears were confirmed when, around 8:30 a.m., the woman was found lying on the driveway near her house. Sarah had several gunshot wounds. Emergency services were immediately called to the scene. Despite the fact that the colleague's initial version was Sarah's, even a superficial examination by the police made it clear that this was not the case. Sarah had most likely become the victim of an attack by another person. The teacher had received extremely serious injuries. As the detectives were able to find out, around 6:30 a.m., she was leaving the house to go to work. But instead, she was shot in the chest area. An unknown attacker fired a shotgun at almost point-blank range. The second charge of shot was also fired from a very close distance into her head. The neighbors admitted to the police that they had indeed heard some shooting in the morning. However, this was a rural area where many hunters lived. Therefore, no one attached much significance to what had happened. In such places, people often use weapons to hunt or scare off wild animals from their property. Forensic experts did not find any fingerprints or traces of the perpetrator at the crime scene. However, as soon as it became clear that shortly before these events, Sarah had completed a difficult divorce process with her husband, suspicions immediately arose. Among the first witnesses who spoke with the detectives were Sarah's friend Dana and her husband Lawrence, who had helped with the move. They confirmed that the Starrs had a difficult divorce process that began after an equally difficult marriage. Moreover, during the last months, after the hearing, the story's heroine often stated that she was afraid of her husband, she feared that he might go so far as to try to deal with her over alimony. At the same time, her ex-husband lived not far from the house that Sarah was renting. It was only a few minutes' walk between them. Of course, after receiving all the information, the detectives began to take a closer look at the main suspect, Jason. He was taken to the police station for questioning. The man denied any involvement in the murder of his ex-wife. A few hours later, he was released because his alibi was confirmed. It turned out that during this period, he was having breakfast at a restaurant with his children. This was confirmed by footage from surveillance cameras and the testimony of other eyewitnesses. Despite the fact that the man was released, the suspicion was not completely removed, because Jason had obvious motives to get rid of Sarah. In addition, the woman's relatives and acquaintances confirmed that the deceased was clearly afraid of her ex-husband. He was the only one with a motive for murder. The woman had no enemies, no connections to the criminal world, and no problems. Could the father of four have killed his ex-wife by hiring a hitman and leaving them without a mother? All this had yet to be figured out. For the next few months, he was closely monitored. However, even by January 2018, nothing incriminating had been found. During this period, a press conference was held, thanks to which the public was informed about the progress of the investigation. It was announced that the state governor had offered a $5,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest of Sarah's killer. Another town resident later contributed an additional $500 to this fund. However, all this yielded no results. Some leads appeared, but during the check, they were discarded. Sarah's children were placed in the custody of social services during this period. At least for the duration of the investigation, due to doubts about the father's decency. After that, many more statements were made by law enforcement officials about the progress of the investigation. The police urged the public to provide important information that would help move the case from a dead end. However, no progress was made for several years. State law enforcement agencies came to the aid of the local sheriff's department. Despite this, the case stalled until December 2021. It was not easy to get close to Jason. However, the detectives were convinced that he was involved in this crime, possibly indirectly, using a hired killer. He had a very strong motive, as the man had to pay more than half of his income to his ex-wife and children. Financial disputes often become a motive for murder. The man tried to get full custody but failed to achieve this through the court. Of course, he did not want to pay thousands of dollars a month. During a check of the suspect's computer, the police came across notes that he had been keeping for a long time. It was something like a draft of a book that he planned to publish in the future. There were chapters about his relationship with Sarah. Jason wrote that he was extremely dissatisfied with the court's decision. He did not want to pay and was thinking about how to avoid payments. He made many degrading notes about both Sarah and women in general. All these hate-filled statements only strengthened the police officer's suspicions about him. In addition, while checking Jason's financial transactions, detectives discovered that from September 7 to November 15 of the year his ex-wife was murdered, he made 7 different transactions totaling $2,600. These were transfers between the main suspect and a person named Lily. During the investigation, the detectives found out that Lily was a friend of Jason's brother. At the same time, before September 7, no transfers had taken place between them. They had barely communicated at all. Thanks to a meeting with Lily, it became known that Jason had given his brother Darren a 2016 motorcycle, a rather expensive vehicle. But what was the purpose of such a gift? The man clearly did not have the financial means for such costly presents. He justified himself by saying that he had an accident but did not want to report it to the authorities, so he gave the damaged bike to his brother for repair. The brother allegedly estimated the scale of the repair at $5,000 and said that he could take payment in parts as spare parts were purchased. Why Jason decided to transfer the money through Lily, whom he hardly knew, the man kept silent about. It looked suspicious. All this was completely legal, but it seemed doubtful that the transfers for the motorcycle repair were made to a girl who was practically a stranger. Jason explained the transfers in the amount of $2,600 as financial assistance that was needed to repair the motorcycle. However, the detectives believed that this was actually a payment to his brother or Lily, one of whom, and possibly both, had attacked his ex-wife and killed her. It was believed that Lily was used as a straw person intermediary to pay for the crime and, at the same time, confuse the tracks. The detectives were also convinced that Jason's same motorcycle was used to get to Alabama unnoticed. Darren was described as a rough, unpleasant man. He had lived most of his life in a trailer in Texas. He was far from any excesses in life and shunned society. His past included several nonviolent crimes. For example, an arrest in 2013, when the man was stopped for speeding. At the same time, the police had a patrol dog with them, which gave a signal about the presence of prohibited substances. Thanks to a search, several types of prohibited were found on him, as well as equipment for their manufacture and use. For this possession of prohibited substances, he received a relatively short sentence. But did this make Darren a murderer? The police checked the brothers' messages and other data from their cell phones. It turned out that before Thanksgiving 2017, the main suspect in the murder had just arrived in Coffee County, Alabama. This happened on November 18, and he stayed here for 10 days. At the same time, he was often near the victim's house. Darren's movements were recorded near the church house. He turned off his cell phone around midnight before Sarah's murder. The perpetrator was probably watching and tracking the teacher, so he wanted to hide data about his geolocation from the detectives. His cell phone turned on again around 10 a.m., already in Texas. On the evening of November 27, the day of the crime, he was in Texas and sent his brother Jason a message that resembled some kind of code. It was about a successful deer hunt. It seemed the brothers were communicating using coded correspondence. One of the story's heroine's neighbors said that he had seen a motorcycle that matched the description of the one kept by the brother. The conspicuous vehicle appeared near Sarah's house several times before the murder. Moreover, before the crime, it was repeatedly noticed here by various people. Another important piece of evidence was a recording from a surveillance camera hanging on a pole located not far from the murdered woman's house. Just a few minutes after the murder, the same motorcycle was caught on camera driving away from this area. Based on all this information, the detectives concluded that Jason had hired his brother to kill his ex-wife. As a result, both men were charged on December 1, 2021. Jason immediately demanded a lawyer, behaving very arrogantly and haughtily, denying any involvement in what had happened. He claimed that the police would not be able to do absolutely anything to him, but soon he himself admitted his guilt in the murder. Jason repeated several times that he had indeed killed his ex-wife. Despite this, he was released on bail. He was to await the hearing at home, wearing a special tracking bracelet on his ankle. The trial was scheduled for June 27, 2022. As for Darren, the situation with his detention was much more complicated. He went on the run, after which the FBI declared a manhunt for the criminal. Eventually, he was put on the FBI's wanted list, and his photo was circulated throughout the country. A reward of $10,000 was promised for any information leading to the arrest of this dangerous criminal. Later, this amount increased to $22,500. Finally, on February 5, 2022, Darren surrendered. At this time, he was in Texas. The man did not plead guilty and refused the right to await the hearings under house arrest. He voluntarily remained in prison until the start of the trial. During this period, the brothers repeatedly talked on the phone. Naturally, their conversations were tapped, but they did not say anything provocative. The preparation of the case materials was delayed. There was a lot of indirect evidence, but there was a clear lack of direct evidence. Darren's lawyer made several attempts to provide confirmation that the murder was committed by another person, but he did not provide any evidence of this. After a check conducted by the detectives, each time after such an appeal, all the suspects proposed by the defense lawyer turned out to be acquitted. In the end, the court even forbade mentioning the listed people as alternative criminals during the hearings. One of the state laws stipulates that without the presence of compelling evidence, no one has the right to even mention a person's name in the context of their involvement in a crime in court. Only on September 11, 2023, hearings finally began over both criminals, and due to postponements, including thanks to the lawyer's side, they were delayed for more than a year. The prosecution focused on proving Jason's financial motive. Obviously, he had no desire to pay more than half of his income to his ex-wife. The prosecutor's office provided a large amount of direct and indirect evidence that Jason had turned to his brother Darren and prompted him to commit murder. He provided his motorcycle so that his relative could get to Alabama and carry out the attack, and transferred money to his girlfriend. The prosecution insisted that Lily's behavior and her connection with the brothers were a weighty argument in the prosecution's piggy bank, because before these events, both men did not communicate. She was a distant acquaintance with whom contacts had long been broken, while money was transferred to Darren through her, and she took a small percentage for herself. Lily managed to justify herself by denying involvement in the crime. According to her confession, the woman had no idea why these two men were engaged in such matters. She was shocked when she learned that she could be regarded as an accomplice in the massacre. However, in the future, it was decided to abandon any claims against Lily. The defense, on the other hand, insisted that the police did not have sufficient grounds to bring charges against the brothers. First, the murder weapon was missing. Second, witnesses who saw the moment of the attack with their own eyes, or recordings from surveillance cameras, were also absent. The lawyer emphasized that other direct evidence that could be considered indisputable was simply absent. Even Jason's notes on the computer were more of a cry from the heart out of desperation. Since he had lost the divorce process, he now had to pay large sums, so he was simply pouring out his soul and discontent in these autobiographical notes. Of course, all this was not enough to consider it direct evidence of a desire to kill anyone. Interestingly, during Darren's stay in Alabama, those 10 days, there were no calls between the brothers. They probably used something less noticeable for communication, either only personal communication or disposable phones that can be purchased on the internet. Such phones are often used specifically for illegal activities. The lawyer also insisted that no footprints, fingerprints, DNA traces, or even tire tracks of the same motorcycle were found at the scene of the massacre to destroy these weighty arguments of the defendant's defense. The recording from the surveillance camera on the pole standing next to the church house also seemed unconvincing to the lawyer. It was a low-quality video where it was difficult to make out anything except that some motorcycle was passing by. The defender referred to the fact that many people in the district had bikes, so anyone from the local residents could have been driving past the pole. The lawyer's main argument was the video showing Jason having breakfast with his children. He visited a restaurant 10 kilometers from Sarah's house. The meal took place at the very moment when his ex-wife was shot by the attacker. In addition, from the very beginning, Jason willingly cooperated with the investigation and voluntarily allowed the police to examine his mobile phone and computer. The lawyer also pointed this out, trying to convince the jury that a real criminal would under no circumstances allow the police to do this, which means he had nothing to hide. However, all this sounded unconvincing, particularly against the background of the behavior and confession he made after his arrest. The court hearings lasted 6 days, after which the jury retired to discuss the verdict. It took 6 full hours of rather lively debate. As a result, the jurors decided that Jason and Darren were guilty of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Until this very moment, the story's heroine's husband had been under house arrest and was using a special tracking bracelet. Now he was taken into custody. On January 4, 2024, both were sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to parole. In fact, this was a great relief for both of them, because in the worst case, the crime could be punished with the death penalty, and capital punishment was entirely expected. But the votes of the jurors were divided, which saved them from execution. Jason was also obliged to pay a $25,000 fine. After that, 54-year-old Darren's lawyer stated that he intended to seek the cancellation of the sentence. At the same time, Jason's defense lawyer did not make such statements due to the man's early confession to the murder. The 4 children of the Starr family were transferred to the custody of the deceased's parents. At the trial, the older twins wished their father to rot in prison and stated that they did not want to see him anymore. Both criminals are still in a federal prison in the state. There is no exact information about the appeal and the struggle for the release of the conspirators. Morning of January 12, 2019, began with an alarming call to the 911 emergency service from the Redlich family residence. On the other end of the line was Danielle Redlich, who reported with pain in her voice that her husband Michael had died of a heart attack. However, when the police arrived at the scene, they were met with a completely different picture. The entire house was filled with blood, and the body of 48-year-old Michael Redlich had numerous stab wounds. The question arose, what really happened on that fateful night? To unravel this tangled story, we need to go back a few decades. The year 1996 became a turning point for 22-year-old Danielle when she met 43-year-old Michael. At that time, he was in a relationship with Danielle's mother, Caitlin Aquina. Michael and Caitlin lived together in Cleveland with Caitlin's younger children, while Danielle, her eldest daughter, lived separately, focusing on her education. She combined her studies at the university in 3 specialties: photography, journalism, and sociology. However, Caitlin's life took a dramatic turn even before her wedding to Michael. She was diagnosed with a terrible illness, breast cancer. Treatment required significant funds, and the necessary extended insurance policy was only available to Michael. So in 1997, they decided to get married. But, unfortunately, despite all the efforts of doctors, 46-year-old Caitlin died 2 years after the wedding. Michael, who was left alone with the children, turned to 23-year-old Danielle for help. He asked her to move in with him to assist in raising her younger siblings. Thus, Danielle, along with her brother and sister, found themselves in the same house where their mother once lived with Michael. Michael was making a successful career in professional sports, selecting talented players. Danielle, on the other hand, worked part-time at a bar at night. Michael became a frequent visitor to this establishment, where they would chat, and after her shift, they would spend time together. Gradually, they grew closer. Michael understood that working at a bar was not what Danielle dreamed of, and it could be dangerous for her. So he used his connections to help his stepdaughter find a job at an advertising agency. Despite the significant age difference, the relationship between the stepfather and stepdaughter began to grow into something more. Danielle saw Michael as a reliable support, a successful and wealthy man who was always ready to help and be her mentor. However, in the early years of living together, there was no romantic relationship between them. They simply took care of the children together, shared household chores, combining it with their own affairs. Michael was offered the position of vice president of corporate sales for the Memphis Grizzlies basketball team, but this required moving to Memphis, Tennessee. He suggested that Danielle and the children go with him. Danielle's family was unaware of their relationship at the time, so the girl wanted to keep it a secret. Initially, she refused, deciding to stay in Cleveland near her relatives to avoid gossip. Michael moved and started working in his new position but continued to maintain a relationship with his young lover, flying to see her every weekend. A year into such meetings, he invited Danielle to visit the cozy town on the banks of the Mississippi where he had settled. Michael confessed that he had bought a house there so that they could finally live together. Danielle was impressed by this gesture and agreed to move. Thanks to Michael's connections, she found a good job on the radio. In 2003, the couple had their first child, a daughter named Jaden. And a year later, they officially got married. It seemed they had a perfect relationship, a successful career, and a happy family life. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling of dissatisfaction with his job due to a change in team management, which cost him the opportunity for promotion. Around this time, the secret of Danielle and Michael's relationship was revealed to her relatives. They were shocked and outraged, considering it unacceptable and disgusting. Some even stopped communicating with the couple. And soon, another child appeared in the Redlich family, a boy named Sawyer. In 2009, Michael's former boss offered him a position on a new team. The man agreed, although it meant another move. They bought a house in California. But after a while, Michael was unexpectedly fired. He found himself without support again, which led to conflicts at work. Feeling undervalued, Michael fell into depression and began abusing alcohol. In the same period, Danielle also quit her job. For some time, the couple lived on savings, having to deny themselves many things. This became an additional burden for the head of the family. However, in 2014, luck smiled upon Michael again. He was offered a lucrative position in Indiana. It was necessary to move once more. Michael went first to get settled in the new place. Danielle and the children stayed in California to finish the house sale. This process dragged on for almost a year. The Redlich family's financial difficulties were left in the past, but distance and lack of communication sowed the seeds of in the couple's relationship. Michael and Danielle began to drift apart. Soon, Michael's health began to fail. An injury put him out of commission for an extended period, depriving him of the ability to work. Stress and tension provoked problems for the man, which he was afraid to tell his wife about for a long time, fearing condemnation and loss. But in the end, he confessed to Danielle, who, suspecting infidelity, was relieved by his honesty and supported him. Michael fell into despair, as even medications did not give the desired effect. The couple found a solution, a course of testosterone injections. But along with the restoration of male strength, Danielle noticed changes in her husband's behavior. He became more energetic, as if he had returned to his youth, but at the same time more impulsive and rough in relationships. In 2014, Michael took the position of sports mentor at the University of Florida. Colleagues noted that the transition from the NBA reduced the family's income, but the man deliberately took this step, tired of constant stress and frequent moves that negatively affected the children. From now on, his mission was to help students unleash their athletic potential. Michael dedicated himself to charity and continued to be a loving father. The Redlich family settled in sunny Florida. At first, they rented a house, and a year later, they decided to finally settle here and purchased their own home near Orlando, in the picturesque suburb of Winter Park. It was a real paradise with a warm climate, lush greenery, developed infrastructure, and a low crime rate. Their new Mediterranean-style home had 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room, an open veranda, and a backyard pool. The total area was 350 square meters. On the attic floor under the roof, Danielle set up her own cozy corner where she could be alone and even spend the night after quarrels with her husband. Michael, as before, provided for the family, building his career, while Danielle quit her job. But despite outward prosperity, a crisis was brewing in the relationship. Testosterone injections, designed to restore Michael's physical shape, had a side effect: the man became irritable and aggressive. This, combined with his alcohol abuse, led to the couple sleeping separately. Danielle complained that during fits of anger, Michael repeatedly used force against her. She herself began to hit the bottle. People familiar with testosterone therapy confirmed that the often provokes aggression, which coincided with the changes in Michael's behavior. Rejuvenation had its dark side. Constant conflicts and misunderstandings led to Michael moving out from the family in 2016, although he continued to financially support the children and pay the bills. By that time, Danielle was already working full-time. The man had free access to the house and regularly visited. Gradually, the relationship began to improve, and Michael returned to the family. But in January 2018, Danielle accidentally came across her husband's correspondence with another woman, with whom he had had dates. She confronted Michael, who apologized, blaming it all on excessive testosterone, assuring that it was nothing serious. Danielle did not believe her husband's denials and decided to meet his mistress face to face. Suspicions were confirmed: they had a long-term relationship. A shocked Danielle kicked Michael out of the house and filed for divorce. But he denied all her accusations in every possible way. Michael begged his wife to change her mind, swore his love and desire to keep the family together for the sake of the children. In the end, he managed to convince her, but this decision proved fatal. After the reconciliation, Danielle accidentally came across Michael's personal notes hidden in a book. From the pages, she learned that her husband was planning a divorce, but the lawyers did not agree with some of the points. Perhaps he was just buying time to settle the formalities and not be left penniless. This discovery broke Danielle's heart. All this time, Michael had been leading her on. Danielle managed to find emails that irrefutably proved that Michael continued to secretly communicate with his mistress. This discovery was a real blow to the woman, because she sincerely believed that her husband loved her and wanted to restore their relationship. She was convinced that they could fix everything, but it turned out that all this time Michael was just using her. In his diary, instead of confessions of love, he described their marriage as 17 years of slavery, from which he finally dared to free himself. However, during the investigation, detectives noticed a strange feature: most of the correspondence was edited. It is quite likely that the criminal himself tried to justify his lies. Danielle firmly decided to cross Michael out of her life once and for all. She wanted him to get out of her house and never come back. The woman was determined to start from scratch and forget about this betrayal forever. She wrote an angry letter, which was later repeatedly referred to by the prosecution during the trial. It contained rather dubious statements and an obvious hint at the unhappy end of their relationship. On the ominous morning of January 12, 2019, around 9 o'clock, Danielle called the 911 rescue service and reported that her husband Michael had died of a heart attack. However, when the police arrived at the scene, they immediately had doubts about the truthfulness of the woman's words, because the man had died from a stab wound. As soon as law enforcement officers crossed the threshold of the house, they were hit by the pungent smell of household chemicals. Heading to the living room, they came across a bucket of bloody water. Someone was clearly trying to clean up traces of the crime. Danielle was the only one in the house, so there was no doubt, she did it. However, the woman chose the wrong time to clean up, because in the room, in a pool of his own blood, her husband's lifeless body was already lying. Nearby lay blood-soaked towels. Due to the huge amount of blood that was literally everywhere, the atmosphere in the house resembled a creepy scene from a horror movie. Blood samples were carefully collected for laboratory analysis. Later, the examination confirmed that it belonged to the victim. According to the widow, in the morning she allegedly found her husband already motionless and stiff. She said that she did not examine the body in detail, but simply assumed that the cause of death was a heart attack. However, it took the police one look at the crime scene to realize that it was murder. Blood was everywhere, and even with the naked eye, it was clear that the man had died a violent death. While communicating with detectives, the woman kept changing her testimony. Realizing that the version about a heart attack sounded completely implausible, she began to insist that her husband had allegedly taken his own life. But this story also looked extremely doubtful. Usually, for people choose simpler, faster and less brutal methods than inflicting numerous stab wounds on themselves. The deeper the police delved into the details of this case, the more obvious the woman's lies became. After carefully examining the crime scene, forensic experts concluded that it was Danielle who had stabbed her husband. But instead of immediately calling an ambulance, she inexplicably delayed for a whole 11 hours. She explained her strange decision by saying that she could not recover from the emotional shock and simply fell asleep. Eventually, Danielle decided to supplement her story with new details. According to the woman, her husband was a cruel and aggressive man. He cheated on her and even raised his hand against her. Michael was a difficult person. At times he could be charming and loving, but at the same time quick-tempered and jealous. It seemed he was waging an exhausting struggle with his inner, including a passion for alcohol. And the more mature and independent Danielle became, the more intrusive and controlling Michael became. The woman said that the evening before, another quarrel broke out between them. The man attacked her and began to strangle her, but she managed to break free from his grip and grab a knife in the kitchen. Then Michael took the weapon from her and began to threaten her with violence. Danielle locked herself in the bathroom, and after a while she heard some strange noise. Going out to see what had happened, she saw her husband lying in a pool of blood. The woman slipped and fell right into this puddle, so her clothes were heavily stained with blood. She tried to give Michael first aid, but to no avail. However, instead of immediately calling the rescue service, Danielle decided to wait until morning for some reason, in case he got better. And just went to bed. When she woke up in the morning and went to check on her husband's condition, she found that he had not improved. Instead, obvious signs of appeared. In desperation, Danielle did not know what to do next. She panicked and decided to take her own life. The woman even found information on the internet on how to properly and tried to do it. But when the first shock passed, she pulled herself together, stopped the bleeding, and still called the rescue service. At the same time, her wounds turned out to be surprisingly superficial, which also led to certain reflections. Danielle explained to the investigation that she did not dare to immediately report what had happened, also because at that time she was on probation. And all because shortly before the incident, she had a fight with friends right in the car. When she was detained, the woman refused to cooperate with the police, for which she later paid with accusations of hooliganism and resisting arrest. During the investigation, the detectives came to the disappointing conclusion that Danielle was not an angel at all. Back on December 5, 2018, she registered on a dating site, looking for connections on the side. This resource united single people with similar views and values. In her profile, the woman indicated the status of single. That's how she met other men, cheating on her lawful husband. Eventually, Michael found out about her treacherous adventures. Despite Danielle's desperate attempts to cover her tracks and carry out a thorough cleaning, a lot of evidence of the crime remained in the house. Forensic experts managed to find characteristic blood splatters in the corners of the room and on the walls. A large knife was found near the entrance to the kitchen. 3 more blood-stained knives lay in the sink. A long, washed-out bloody trail was also noticed, stretching from the bedroom to the living room. Obviously, the body was deliberately moved to stage a different course of events. The woman was taken to the hospital, where she was given first aid and thoroughly examined. Fortunately, apart from a few superficial cuts on her wrists, she had no serious injuries. It was for these injuries that Danielle used the knives that later ended up in the sink. However, it was obvious that she did not cut herself seriously, but only for the sake of appearances, to adapt the picture of the event to her version. A psychiatric examination found the suspect to be completely sane. During the autopsy, the forensic expert found that the man's death was caused by a single but fatal stab wound to the chest, which led to massive blood loss. In addition, a lacerated wound to the left eye was found on the body. The examination showed that Michael could not have inflicted such injuries on himself. So from the very beginning, all suspicions of the investigation were focused on his wife. Toxicological analysis revealed a high alcohol content in the deceased's body, while Danielle's blood had none at all. Given the degree of Michael was unlikely to be able to attack his wife. He could barely stand on his feet. Thanks to her own confession, the woman's involvement in her husband's death was beyond doubt. It only remained to determine which category of crime her actions should be attributed to, whether it was forced self-defense or intentional murder. By the start of the trial, the suspect had changed her testimony so many times, getting tangled up in lies, that her words were no longer perceived as credible. The trial began in 2021. Danielle was immediately offered a plea deal with the investigation to mitigate the sentence. If she pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, she could count on 10 years in prison. But the defendant categorically refused such a prospect, insisting on the version of self-defense. At the same time, she was aware that if she was found guilty of premeditated murder in the first or second degree, she would face life imprisonment. The detectives investigating this tangled case had to study and analyze a huge array of information, which took a lot of time. They scrutinized the couple's correspondence on dating sites, as well as Michael's personal dialogues with his mistress. These messages gave the impression that Danielle loved her husband to the last, at least that's the feeling she expressed in her messages. At the same time, the woman felt betrayed and terribly disappointed. After the exposure of the marital infidelity, she repeatedly sent them angry messages. The interviewed neighbors confirmed that recently, conflicts constantly arose in the Redlich family, which often turned into outright fights. Interestingly, the couple was characterized in completely different ways. The neighbors described Michael as a kind and sensitive man, while most considered his wife a scandalous person and the instigator of quarrels. The investigators also spoke with the Redlich children. At the time of the tragedy, their daughter Jaden was 15 years old, and their son was 8. Both unanimously stated that Michael was a wonderful father. He put his heart and soul into them, dreaming that the children would make a successful sports career. The boy and girl attended elite schools and prestigious sports sections. Their father contributed to their advancement in every possible way, using all his connections. Michael devoted all his free time to his children, so an amazingly warm, trusting relationship was established between them. Despite all the misunderstandings with his wife, Michael made every effort to keep the family together. His children emphasized this after the tragic events. It is noteworthy that daughter Jaden, who was extremely close to her father, did not express such affection for her mother at all. In her opinion, Danielle was a toxic and overly impulsive person. The girl was convinced that it was her mother who invariably provoked all conflicts between the parents. Michael's friends and colleagues unanimously assured that he was a remarkably caring father and devoted family man, and the source of aggression in their home was always his wife. To an outside eye, the Redlich family looked quite prosperous, because all the troubles usually remained behind closed doors, without airing dirty laundry in public. But in reality, behind the facade of respectability, there were many unpleasant secrets. In particular, the couple's relatives gave very contradictory testimonies. The children claimed that the mother was the instigator of absolutely all family conflicts. But Danielle's relatives, who became involuntary witnesses to the quarrels, confirmed that the husband did put moral pressure on her, although he never allowed himself to use physical force in their presence. A month after the crime, Danielle Redlich was officially charged with second-degree murder. In addition, the investigation managed to establish that the suspect was actively trying to confuse the investigation by destroying and falsifying evidence. So the woman was also charged with these illegal actions. During the investigation, Danielle was in custody. The defense, in turn, insisted on the version of self-defense, but the prosecutors focused on the fact that 11 hours passed from the moment of the event to calling the ambulance. In fact, this deprived the victim of any chance of rescue. This opinion was confirmed by the forensic expert, who argued that with timely medical assistance, Michael could well have survived. The prosecution provided the court with numerous evidence of Danielle's marital infidelity. Videos were shown in which she behaves inappropriately and even attacks her husband. However, the woman's lawyers argued that all these incidents were dictated by the need for self-defense. The investigation established that just 2 days before the tragedy, there was a heated quarrel between the spouses. An intoxicated Michael broke into the bathroom where Danielle was hiding at the time. Their daughter rushed to intervene in the conflict and took the bottle of alcohol from her father. Danielle, taking advantage of the moment, fled the house. She returned only late in the evening, making sure that her husband was already asleep. The next day, their daughter Jaden went to spend the night at a friend's house. On the day of the tragedy, Michael took his son to a football match and invited his wife to join. Danielle agreed, hoping for reconciliation. However, as witnesses noted, the woman looked sad and a little tipsy. The couple hardly spoke to each other, and before parting ways, they managed to quarrel. On the way home, they took their son to a friend's house for a sleepover. Afterwards, Danielle stopped by McDonald's for food and returned home around 10:30 in the evening. By that time, Michael had already managed to have a few drinks. They were left alone in the house. The conflict erupted after the man saw a message on Danielle's phone from her lover, whom she was planning to meet. Michael attacked his wife, grabbed her by the hair, and began to strangle her. In desperation, the woman grabbed the first knife she could find and plunged it into her attacker's chest. Michael fell, bleeding, and lost consciousness. Danielle did not inflict any more wounds on him. She later claimed that she tried to call an ambulance by dialing 911, but in a panic, she made a mistake in the number, so she could not get through. The police managed to track this failed call and confirm her words. Being in a state of shock, Danielle collapsed exhausted next to her husband's body and lay like that until morning. This was how she explained her 11-hour delay in calling the rescuers. The prosecutors, on the other hand, insisted that all the defendant's actions were carefully planned and dictated by hatred for her husband. After all, the woman understood that divorce was inevitable, but she was probably guided by mercenary motives and did not want to share the property. Even Danielle's close relatives confirmed that she always had problems with controlling aggression and impulsiveness. However, the lawyers insisted on the opposite, accusing Michael of pathological jealousy and domestic violence. Although even the couple's children admitted that their mother was more often the instigator of family quarrels. During the court hearings, the jury was shown revealing photos of Michael's garage and car, abundantly strewn with food debris. In this way, Danielle repeatedly demonstrated her anger and contempt for her husband. The prosecutors emphasized that throughout the investigation, the woman changed her testimony many times. She destroyed evidence, thoroughly cleaned up the crime scene, obviously trying to confuse the investigation. This deprived her of any credibility in the eyes of the jury. The prosecutor was convinced that Danielle deliberately, in a fit of rage, took the life of her husband. Sudden outbursts of aggression, they say, were commonplace for her. Danielle publicly admitted that she lied about self-defense because she was afraid that no one would believe her. Allegedly, the lie was her panicked reaction to the fear of inevitable punishment. At the beginning of the trial, daughter Jayden testified against her mother, but later retracted her words. The girl stated that the incident with the broken bottle 2 days before the tragedy was the only act of aggression she had observed from her father for a long time. At the same time, Michael allegedly sincerely apologized to his wife for his behavior. These statements were confirmed by several witnesses, including the deceased's friends and his brother. One of Michael's friends said that he once joked that his wife was a real madwoman, but as long as he hid the knives away, everything would be fine. The defense, in turn, insisted that even when Michael was Danielle's stepfather, he obsessively pursued her, not giving the girl a pass. He allegedly completely subjugated her to his will, forcing her into an relationship. And then he took her to a strange city altogether, isolating her from family and close environment. Even the fact that on the fatal night the woman inflicted only one stab wound, according to her lawyers, testified in favor of the version of self-defense against a sudden attack by a man uncontrollable in his aggression. After hearing all the arguments of the parties, on June 17, 2022, the jury found Danielle not guilty of premeditated murder. The jurors agreed with the defense's version of forced self-defense. However, the woman was still found guilty of falsifying and destroying evidence, for which she was sentenced to 5 years of probation. At the same time, the court took into account the fact that while awaiting the verdict, Danielle had already served 3.5 years behind bars. The final verdict in this high-profile case was announced on August 5, 2022. The defendant was released right in the courtroom. The case of Danielle Redlich became a sad reminder that even behind the official facade of a respectable family life, terrible deeds can hide, harbored resentment, jealousy, anger, and violence. This case raised painful questions of domestic violence, toxic control in relationships, and the detrimental consequences of unresolved psychological traumas. Unfortunately, too often such stories have a tragic ending. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.